The wind howled like a dying animal as Jonathan Renfield clutched his coat tighter, his breath forming clouds in the freezing Carpathian air. The carriage had long departed, leaving him stranded at the base of the jagged cliffs. Above him loomed Castle Dracula, black stone walls rising like a skeletal hand clutching the sky, its ancient spires silhouetted by the blood-red moon. Jonathan was no stranger to superstition, yet the villagers' warnings haunted him. "Do not go there," they had whispered, pressing garlic into his palms. "The castle sleeps, but it remembers." He'd laughed it off then. Now, every crunch of gravel beneath his boots echoed like a death knell. He reached the iron gate, rusted but massive, crowned with wolf skulls impaled on spikes. They stared down at him with hollow sockets, as if watching. He hesitated, then reached for the ancient chain. As he tugged, a distant bell tolled once, deep and thunderous. The gates creaked open by themselves. Jonathan stepped inside. The courtyard was choked with mist, thick and choking, and the statues lining the inner path were grotesqueries, figures with too many limbs, screaming faces, and eyes that seemed to follow his every move. The door to the main keep stood ajar. He entered the castle. Inside, the air was damp and cold, tinged with the scent of mildew, rotted wood, and something older, something coppery. The stone floor groaned beneath his boots as he walked through the candlelit foyer, his eyes flicking toward the enormous portraits adorning the walls. The largest was of a man with pale skin, eyes like burning coals, and a crimson-lined cloak. Count Vladislaus Dracula. The legend whispered that Dracula had not died, merely slept. Suddenly, the doors slammed behind him. The candles flickered wildly, plunging the hall into stuttering darkness. Jonathan spun, his heart thudding like war drums. A figure emerged from the shadows. Tall. Thin. Elegant. The scent of earth and decay followed him like a shroud. "Mr. Renfield," the figure said, voice velvet and venom. "I've been expecting you." Count Dracula's presence was magnetic, unnatural. His face was too perfect, no pores, no flaws, just smooth alabaster skin and a smile like a blade. His eyes bore into Jonathan's, and for a moment, he felt his thoughts being unraveled. "See Count Dracula," Jonathan stammered, bowing. "I come on behalf of the Harker law firm in London to finalize the documents for your purchase of Carfax Abbey." Dracula gestured smoothly, his fingers unnaturally long, tipped with sharp nails. "Of course. Come, we will discuss everything in the study. The night is still young." They walked through corridors that twisted unnaturally, the architecture subtly wrong, as if the castle shifted when not observed. Jonathan swore a door had just been behind him, but it was gone now. As they entered the study, Jonathan saw walls lined with books bound in cracked, human-colored leather. A great hearth blazed, but it gave no warmth. Dracula poured him a goblet of dark red wine, or what Jonathan hoped was wine. He sipped it hesitantly. It was metallic. Thick. The Count's smile widened. "I see you do not shy from our customs," he said, voice almost amused. "Tell me, Mr. Renfield, have you ever had a dream so vivid, so grotesque, that it followed you into waking life?" Jonathan blinked. I don't think so." The Count leaned forward. "You will. Everyone does. This castle has a memory. And tonight, it remembers." At that, the fireplace flared unnaturally bright, and the shadows on the wall moved independently of the flames. Jonathan stood abruptly, dizzy. The room spun. The wine. There was something in it. I need to lie down," he muttered. "But of course," said the Count, rising. "I've prepared a room for you, deep within the east wing. Away from the noise of the world." Jonathan stumbled after him down a spiral staircase that went too far down. He could feel the walls pulse, as if breathing. The torches dimmed as they descended. At the end of the corridor, Dracula opened a door. The room was windowless. Old. The bed was made, but the linens were stained a faint rust color. Chains dangled from the ceiling. "I trust this will suffice," said the Count. Jonathan collapsed onto the bed, barely conscious. He heard the door lock. Then silence. Some time later, how much time, he could not say, Jonathan awoke to the sound of whispering. Not outside the room, but inside his mind. Shapes moved in the darkness. One was crawling on the ceiling, pale, bald, with glistening eyes and fangs that clicked rhythmically. He screamed and bolted upright. The figure dropped from the ceiling like a spider and vanished. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hall. A knock. "Mr. Renfield," came Dracula's voice. "Are you well?" Jonathan swallowed a scream. "Why, yes. Just a nightmare." "You'll have many here," said the Count. "This place feasts on the fears of men." And then the footsteps receded. Jonathan slowly stood, inching to the door. Locked. He looked around. The walls were not made of stone, but bone, human vertebrae stacked like bricks beneath the flaking plaster. The mirror above the washbasin reflected everything, except him. No reflection. He stared at his empty image, feeling something stir in his veins. His mouth tasted of iron. His gums ached. Something was wrong. Suddenly, he saw something in the mirror, not him, but behind him. 3 pale women with sunken eyes and mouths like torn gashes were crawling across the ceiling, giggling, whispering his name. Jonathan. He turned to run, but the door had vanished. The castle had closed in. And now, the real nightmare had begun. Jonathan backed into the center of the room as the 3 women dropped from the ceiling like wraiths descending from the rafters of hell. They moved with a sickening grace, bones cracking in reverse as they unfurled to stand upright. Their skin was porcelain pale, stretched tightly across emaciated frames, and their eyes glowed faintly red, like embers about to catch fire. "Don't be afraid," one of them whispered, her voice like a lullaby whispered through broken glass. "We only want a taste," said the second, licking cracked lips. The third giggled, running clawed fingers along the wall, leaving trails of blackened rot on the stone. Jonathan's legs gave out, and he crumpled to the floor, trembling. What are you?" he choked. "We are his brides," one whispered, crawling toward him on all fours. "The Count's children. Made from his flesh, and his thirst." They circled him like wolves, moving in unison. One leaned in and inhaled deeply near his throat. So warm still. So full of life. So loud. Their sharp teeth shimmered in the torchlight. The first sank her nails into his shoulder, drawing a thin line of blood. She licked it and moaned with ecstasy. "Oh, so sweet." Jonathan screamed and scrambled backward, but the second had already grabbed his ankle. Her grip was inhumanly strong. She opened her mouth, revealing rows of jagged teeth like a shark's. Just as her mouth neared his leg, the door burst open. "Enough." The voice cracked through the chamber like thunder. Dracula stood in the doorway, his eyes burning with fury, the darkness behind him coiling like smoke. The brides recoiled instantly, hissing, their forms blurring like shadows doused in light. "He is mine," Dracula growled, striding forward. "Not for feeding. Not yet." The third bride slithered back into the shadows, muttering curses in a language older than time. The others followed, melting into the walls like mist dissolving into stone. Jonathan stared at Dracula in horror. "What are you? What is this place?" Dracula regarded him with a pitying gaze. "This castle is a womb of blood, a tomb of memory. You were never sent here to help me. You were lured." "Why me?" "Because you are young," the Count said softly, almost kindly. "Because your soul is strong. Because I need you." Jonathan's pulse raced. "Need me for what?" Dracula knelt before him, not in reverence, but as a predator before a chosen sacrifice. To awaken what I truly am. For centuries I have slept, dreaming in the blackness, waiting for the right vessel to reignite the old blood. And you, Jonathan, you walked into the lion's den, alone and willing. Jonathan crawled backward, gasping. I'm not a vessel. I'm not a part of this nightmare. You already are, Dracula said with finality. You drank the wine. My blood. You carry me now. Jonathan's stomach turned violently. The metallic taste in his mouth. The ache in his gums. The absence of a reflection. No, he whispered. Dracula's hand shot out and grabbed him by the throat, not choking, but holding him still. You will come to understand, Renfield. This is not damnation. It is rebirth. And with that, he slammed Jonathan's head against the stone floor. The world vanished into darkness. When he awoke, he was in a different room. Smaller. Barer. Only a candle flickered in the corner, casting grotesque shadows against the walls. The window was bricked up, but blood had seeped through the mortar, painting red veins across the stone. Something inside him had changed. His breathing was slower. His skin felt colder. He stood up, and his balance was strange. His vision sharper. Every sound, every heartbeat in the castle, was painfully loud. He clutched his head. No, 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 no. There was a rusted mirror leaning against the far wall. He approached it, terrified. At first, he saw nothing, just the flicker of the candle. Then, a shadow. Not his body, but his presence, like a black mist shaped in his form. No, he sobbed. The door creaked open behind him. One of the brides stood there. Don't cry, Jonathan, she said sweetly. This is the beginning. He chose you. I don't want this, he roared. She entered the room, holding a bowl. Drink this. It will ease the change. Jonathan slapped it away. It shattered on the floor, the thick red liquid soaking into the cracks. She smiled. Good. Fight him. It makes it more delicious. She turned and left him alone again. That night, the castle came alive. Screams echoed through the corridors. Something howled in the distance, half beast, half human. Jonathan pressed his ear to the wall and heard dozens of whispers, moans of hunger, wet feeding sounds, metal against flesh, and the chanting of ancient rites. He tried the door again. Still locked. But as he turned, the wall behind him shifted. A crack formed. Then another. And finally, a section crumbled, revealing a hidden passageway. He hesitated, then stepped through. The narrow corridor was suffocating, filled with bone dust and whispers that bled from the walls. His feet crunched over skulls. Symbols were etched in blood on every surface, writhing like worms. He emerged into a chamber beneath the castle, a crypt. Rows of coffins lined the walls. Some open. Some nailed shut from the inside. Black vines pulsed along the ceiling like veins. In the center was a stone altar, and on it, a book bound in flayed skin. He approached. His name was carved on the cover. Jonathan Renfield. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside, pages detailed a ritual. A prophecy. A rebirth. Not of Dracula alone, but of something far older. The Crimson God. The first vampire. Dracula was merely a vessel, and now, so was Jonathan. His blood was the key. Suddenly, the coffins began to rattle. The dead were waking. And he was already too late to run. The rattling grew louder. Each coffin shuddered violently as if the damned inside were clawing to escape centuries of torment. Jonathan stepped back, eyes wide, heart pounding, not with fear alone, but with something far worse. Recognition. The symbols in the book had unlocked something inside him. A memory not his own, but ancient and buried deep within the marrow of his bones. Screams in forgotten tongues. Cities swallowed in eternal night. Skies that bled. He stumbled away from the altar as the first coffin lid slid off and crashed to the floor with a deafening bang. A cloud of dry rot and the stench of decomposition exploded into the chamber. From within, a figure slowly rose, skeletal, wrapped in centuries-old funeral linens, eyes glowing with a pale, unnatural hunger. Jonathan turned to run, but more coffins opened behind him. One by one, the dead climbed free, not with the mindless shamble of corpses, but with precision. Hunger defined their every movement. Their spines cracked upright. Their mouths opened with grotesque delight. They saw him. Renfield, one hissed, voice thick with ancient rot. The key has awakened. Another stepped forward. Her jaw was partially missing, but her words were clear. You carry the Crimson God's breath. You carry him. Jonathan backed into the altar. His hands, trembling, gripped the book. Pages flipped on their own, as though summoned by a silent wind. A chant appeared in dark ink that bled fresh onto the parchment. Blood to blood. Flesh to flame. Name to name. Something inside him answered. He doubled over in pain as his back arched unnaturally. His gums split open, fangs pressing through, raw and hot. His eyes burned, and veins pulsed black beneath his skin. A growl escaped his lips, primal and deep, not his voice anymore. The dead knelt in unison. Welcome, Harbinger, they whispered. Bearer of the Crimson. No, Jonathan gasped, voice cracking between mortal and monstrous. I'm not your god. I'm not your anything. A deep, guttural laugh echoed through the crypt. It came not from the risen dead, but from everywhere. The walls vibrated. Dust rained down. The vines overhead moved. They were not vines, they were arteries. Thick, pulsing tubes filled with dark, rotting blood. They slithered across the ceiling and down the walls like tendrils of some slumbering beast. One dipped low toward Jonathan, pulsing with hunger. He tried to run, but it lashed out and wrapped around his arm. The pain was immediate, a burning cold, as though his veins were being replaced. It pierced into his skin and fed on him. His scream shook the chamber. He awoke on the altar again, soaked in sweat and something thicker, blood, his or another's, he couldn't tell. The undead had retreated. The chamber was quiet now, save for the slow dripping of blood from the arteries above. He stood unsteadily and saw something new. A mark on his chest. It wasn't a wound but a brand, burned into his flesh, a spiral of fangs, surrounding an eye with a vertical slit. The Crimson Sigil. Suddenly, footsteps echoed behind him. He spun. A man stood in the crypt's entrance. He was pale, like a corpse too long in the cold, but not undead. His eyes were blue fire, and his coat was worn, blood-stained, and lined with wooden stakes. Around his neck, a rosary smoldered as if trying to ignite against his skin. Jonathan Harker, the man said. Or should I say? Renfield now? Jonathan's voice cracked. Who are you? I'm Van Helsing. The name hit Jonathan like a thunderclap. The Hunter. The legendary Slayer. The one who once ended Dracula's reign. I came because the blood moon rose 2 weeks early, Van Helsing said. And with it, the scent of the Crimson God. Jonathan stepped back. He's inside me. I know, Van Helsing said gravely. That's why I'm going to kill you. Before Jonathan could react, Van Helsing hurled a silver dagger. It struck Jonathan in the chest. But it didn't pierce. The blade hissed and bounced off his skin like metal against stone. Van Helsing stared. Jonathan looked down, his skin had turned black where the dagger hit, then faded back to pale. The sigil pulsed once, like a heartbeat. I didn't do that, Jonathan whispered. No, Van Helsing said slowly. He did. The arteries overhead began to pulse again. The book on the altar opened once more. Drink and be born anew. Jonathan clutched his head. The hunger returned, so intense it felt like his stomach was turning inward. His throat burned. His teeth ached. And he wanted to feed. No, he muttered. Please. Van Helsing stepped forward, lifting a crucifix. The metal glowed. Jonathan screamed, collapsing as the light struck him. Steam rose from his skin. The mark on his chest fought against the symbol, glowing red-hot. Van Helsing stood over him. I can stop this before it begins. You have to die. Jonathan looked up through tears and blood. I don't want to become him. You already have. The chamber quaked again. This time worse. The artery overhead burst, showering them both in ancient blood. A scream, inhuman, thunderous, echoed through the earth. Van Helsing looked up in horror. He's coming through you. Jonathan's eyes turned black as pitch. The Crimson Rebirth had begun. The scream had not faded. It rippled through the earth, surged through the marrow of every bone, and echoed through the crypt like the death knell of sanity itself. Van Helsing stood motionless, soaked in arterial blood that sizzled against his relics. His crucifix dimmed as the chamber's light was consumed by a swelling red darkness. Something primal, older than hell, was waking. Jonathan clutched his skull and screamed again. His voice was not alone anymore, it was layered. There was a deeper, alien tongue beneath it, something ancient that tasted of black sand and eternal night. Van Helsing stepped forward with trembling defiance. I killed him once, he whispered. I will kill him again. Jonathan raised his head. His eyes were gone. Where once was humanity, now two vertical slits glowed with dripping crimson light. They pulsed with a rhythm not bound to the living world. From his back, something moved, flesh shifting, bones stretching beneath skin. Wings. Not leathery or feathered, but shaped like ruptured veins. They pulsed like the arteries above. He rose from the altar without effort. The coffin lids clattered again. The dead began to kneel. The prophecy was unfolding. Van Helsing acted on instinct. He hurled 3 silver stakes in rapid succession. One buried in Jonathan's side, another pierced his thigh, and the third grazed his cheek, sizzling on impact. The transformed Harker roared, his voice no longer his own, but a bellow that shook dust from ancient walls. Still, he did not fall. Instead, he whispered. And the dead moved. They didn't lurch or crawl. They rushed. 10, 20, perhaps 30 of them surged toward Van Helsing like a wall of rot and gnashing teeth. He backed up, pulling a vial from his coat. With a sharp crack, he threw it at his feet. The explosion of holy fire incinerated the first wave of undead instantly. Charred limbs skittered across the crypt. Smoke thickened the air. The hunter ran. Corridors twisted around him. The tomb had changed. It was alive now. Jonathan walked slowly through the wreckage. His wounds sealed without touch. The sigil on his chest burned brighter, now pulsing in time with the artery veins overhead. He no longer felt fear. He felt hunger. But beyond that, power. He saw with the eyes of the undying one, the memories of Vlad the Impaler whispering through his blood. Whole villages drained in moments. Pikes adorned with heads. The sky black with bats. Empires falling beneath the shadow of one name. Dracula. He was not merely infected. He was becoming him. Van Helsing reached the catacombs, where walls of skulls and femurs lined the tight corridors. He fumbled for breath, heart pounding, not from exertion, but the certainty that he had failed. He reached a sealed chamber. The tomb of the ancients. He had sworn never to return here. But he had no choice. He lit the ceremonial candles. The temperature dropped instantly. The flames burned cold. And then, he spoke their names. Each syllable was an agony to utter. Language lost to the living tongue. Blood welled in his mouth as he finished the final name. Silence. And then, the tomb trembled. From the stone slabs, they rose. The ancients. The first vampires, eldritch, mummified horrors with elongated skulls and translucent skin stretched like old parchment. They had no eyes, yet saw everything. No mouths, yet hungered for the end of all light. You would awaken us, Helsing, one rasped through thought, not voice. He dropped to his knees. He returns. Dracula, through the boy. A long silence. Then another spoke, its voice like wind over dead branches, he who betrayed even us. A third leaned in. You bring his scent. It bleeds from the air. He cannot be allowed to complete the rebirth, Van Helsing said. Help me stop him. They looked at one another, heads twitching at impossible angles. We do not help the living, one said. But we hate him more. Meanwhile, Jonathan stood in the heart of the crypt, alone now. The altar had vanished. The arteries above were thicker, pulsing so violently they split open, raining blood and worms onto the stone. The chamber darkened into something deeper than shadow. He heard footsteps. But they were his. He turned, and saw himself. Or what he had once been. The old Jonathan. Human. Innocent. Terrified. Please, the human version begged. Don't let him in. Jonathan stepped forward. It's too late. No. No, it's not. You're stronger than him. The reflection began to decay, its eyes sinking into black pits, its teeth falling out one by one. You think you're in control, it whispered. But you're not even real anymore. You're a vessel. Jonathan's hand moved involuntarily toward his chest. The sigil bit him. He screamed. Van Helsing returned with the ancients behind him, walking like shifting shadows. Their presence warped the corridor. Walls wept blood. Rats exploded from their burrows. They reached the main crypt. Jonathan was waiting, hovering inches above the altar, his body flickering like a dying candle. Van Helsing raised his crucifix. One of the ancients reached out, its arm extended 10 feet in a blink, and touched the sigil on Jonathan's chest. There was a blast of dark light. Every candle died. Then, silence. Jonathan collapsed. Smoke rose from his chest. Van Helsing approached cautiously. The sigil was gone. But when he looked into Jonathan's eyes, they were not human. They were not Dracula's. They were something older. The ancients stepped back in unison. This is not Dracula, one hissed. Another trembled. This is, his father. The air in the crypt no longer belonged to earth. It pulsed, thick and living, every breath tasting of rust and decay. Van Helsing stood motionless, trembling. He had faced the vampire Lord Dracula himself, but what had risen in Jonathan Harker's body was something older, deeper, a primordial intelligence that predated crosses, relics, even blood itself. The ancients backed away, hissing like boiling oil. Their skeletal forms began to crack and bleed from their eyes. This was never meant to wake, one gurgled, collapsing into dust. Another screamed, the first sin walks. He is the hunger incarnate. And then they burned, spontaneously combusting, consumed by unseen fire as though judged unworthy to exist in his presence. All that remained was silence. And him. Jonathan floated inches above the blood-stained altar. His eyes had turned to two perfect voids. His flesh shimmered like translucent parchment stretched over blackness. The sigil on his chest was gone. But in its place, a gaping, shifting mouth had opened. It breathed, not air, but souls. Screams echoed from it, hundreds, thousands, whispering inside. Van Helsing couldn't move. His limbs were iron. His heart beat backwards. Jonathan, or the thing that wore him, spoke. Its voice was not sound. It slithered into the skull like oil. I have no name. I am the thirst that birthed the bloodline. I am what Dracula feared. The chamber around them pulsed. Bricks bled. The walls whispered in tongues. Jonathan raised a single hand, and the corpses that littered the tomb, burned, broken, ancient, began to twitch. One by one, they rose. Not as vampires. Not as ghouls. As voids. Empty, faceless shells, their skin peeling back to reveal nothingness. They walked without sound. They hungered without mouths. Van Helsing screamed a prayer. Latin poured from his lips, desperate, cracked. He held out the crucifix, which burst into flame in his hand. His skin blistered. He dropped it, screaming. Faith is useless here, the creature whispered. It stepped down from the altar, and the floor caved in where it walked, rotting centuries in an instant. The ground itself rejected its presence. Van Helsing backed away blindly, gasping, gripping his hand, scorched to the bone. His mind reeled. How had this happened? He'd come to stop Dracula's return, but he had opened a gate to something far worse. You opened the tomb, the creature said. You spoke the true names. You broke the seal. I was buried beneath Dracula to keep him from becoming me. It reached toward Van Helsing. A single finger extended, draped in veins that moved like worms. Van Helsing screamed, feeling his lungs collapse. His mouth filled with maggots. He dropped to his knees as visions flooded him, visions of earth swallowed by black skies, oceans of blood, children born eyeless into eternal night, cities turned to bone, and stars blinking out one by one. Kill me, he gasped. No. Then, a scream. Not from Van Helsing. From above. The ceiling shattered as something enormous crashed through, wings of glistening leather, fangs long as swords, and eyes burning with eternal fury. Dracula. Not in human form, but in his true monstrous shape, a great bat dragon, a grotesque, coiled beast of night and bone. He had clawed his way out of hell to return. He had come, not to reclaim his throne, but to fight for it. The air trembled with ancient hatred. Dracula's massive form struck the crypt floor, cracking it in half. His roar shattered the walls, sending shockwaves through the earth. The thing inside Jonathan looked up, and for the first time, its smile faltered. Son, it said. Dracula's reply was a war cry in a language long dead. He lunged. Claws met void. Their collision flattened the crypt, sent ancient tombs flying into the darkness. Bones shattered into ash. The dead screamed. Dracula tore into the creature, ripping through Jonathan's chest. Black ichor spilled. The mouth in his torso shrieked. 1,000 souls poured from it, screaming in agony. They tried to escape, but Dracula's wings wrapped around them, imprisoning the wailing spirits in bone and blood. You will not rise, Dracula growled. Not through him. But the creature fought back. Its arms split into tendrils. It pierced Dracula's chest, rooting into his heart, drinking his immortal blood. Dracula screamed, a sound so deep it made the earth quake. His body began to decay, his skin rotting as the creature fed on him. And yet, he smiled. Van Helsing, barely conscious, saw it. Dracula had planned this. This was his last war. A suicide pact. Now. Dracula bellowed. Hunter, finish it. Van Helsing, weak and dying, crawled forward. He pulled from his coat the last weapon he had kept hidden even from himself, a sunstone, a holy relic said to hold a fragment of the first dawn. It glowed now with blinding light, reacting to the darkness. He hurled it. It struck Jonathan's chest. There was no explosion. No flash. Just a sudden, terrible silence. Then, screaming. The void being howled as its body convulsed, twisting in every direction. Dracula clung to it, his arms embedded in its writhing form, holding it still. The sunstone burned through them both. "You will not take this world," Dracula hissed, before his body erupted into flame. Jonathan's mouth screamed louder, splitting into jagged tears, gushing the last of the trapped souls in shrieking torrents. And then, nothing. Ash. Silence. When Van Helsing awoke, it was dawn. The tomb was gone. Dracula was gone. Jonathan's body was nowhere to be found. Only the sunstone remained, cracked and dark. And written in blood across the ruined altar, as if scrawled by a dying god, were the words. He was not the last. The infection had no sound. It passed not by bite or blood, but by thought. In the days following the tomb's collapse, Van Helsing wandered the blackened ruins alone. His hand was still seared from the holy relic. His body ached, brittle from exposure to the unspeakable. Yet worse than the pain was the feeling in the back of his mind, something whispering. Not words, not language. Just a feeling of emptiness pulling inward. He had won. And yet, the world did not feel saved. London, 3 days later. Mina sat at the window of her asylum cell, staring into a sky that no longer felt like heaven's domain. She no longer cried, no longer spoke. Her skin had paled to ash. The nurses whispered about her sleeping with her eyes open, and when one tried to clip her nails, they found her blood was black, thick like tar. In her mind, Jonathan was alive. She could hear him again. And each time she heard his voice, the world bent slightly. Doors would open by themselves. Glass would shatter if she screamed. Her dreams were not hers anymore. They were full of wings. Fog crept into the city, and never left. It was thicker than ever before, pressing against glass, seeping through wood, crawling beneath doors. The gaslights dimmed within it. Horses refused to walk through it. And in the hours just before dawn, people began to go missing. It began with the birds. The ravens, the sparrows, all gone. Then the dogs. Then the beggars. And then, the children. They would vanish from their beds, leaving only black stains where their heads had rested on the pillow. Some of the stains whispered. Van Helsing returned to London with the cracked sunstone bound to his wrist with wire and salt. He was gaunt, walking with a limp, his eyes bloodshot. He no longer wore a cross. Because crosses no longer worked. He had tried. In the church on Holborn, he held a crucifix to a crying woman who was changing, her eyes blackening, her veins rising like cables. She laughed and shattered the icon with a breath. No God answered anymore. Only the void. At the Ministry of Internal Affairs, Sir Charles Penrose reviewed growing reports with trembling hands. Mass psychosis, the doctors claimed. Disease of the lungs, said the coroners. Satan, whispered the priests, before their throats swelled shut. The Queen's physician hung himself in the Tower. 10 ships from the Baltic were found drifting empty in the Thames. Every crew member was missing. Every sail was stained with claw marks and salt. Worse were the mouths. Etched into the wooden hulls. Perfect circles. Human-sized. Biting inwards from the outside. As if something had tried to eat its way aboard. Van Helsing found Mina again at Bethlehem Asylum. She stood in the rain, barefoot and smiling, her face upturned toward the moon, except it wasn't the moon. It was a black disk, swallowing stars, something wrong in the sky. Mina, he rasped. You need to come with me. She turned. Slowly. Mina is gone, she said in Jonathan's voice. And she smiled. It wasn't her face anymore. It was his. And then hers. Then neither. Van Helsing stumbled backward, clutching the relic on his wrist. It burned, but did not glow. She, or it, stepped forward, barefoot across broken glass. Her eyes turned to void. Dracula was my jailer, she whispered. But now he's ash. You freed me. Van Helsing raised a dagger of silver. You're not him. No, she said. I'm what he feared. I'm what fed him. He lunged. She didn't move. He stabbed deep into her chest, expecting flesh. Instead, it felt like air collapsing. The dagger vanished into her with no resistance. His wrist froze in place, tendons snapping. Mina's mouth opened. So did her chest. Inside was darkness. It reached. It kissed him. Van Helsing screamed as memories poured from his skull, his mother's voice, the taste of bread, the scent of his first lover's hair. All gone. Devoured. Mina stepped back, allowing him to drop. His eyes were gray now. Empty. But he wasn't dead. He lived, but hollowed. A shell. A warning. That night, every statue in London cracked. Every church bell rang once, then melted. The Thames turned thick. Not with blood, but with teeth. Tiny human teeth, floating by the millions. And in the sky, the stars blinked. Not all at once. But one by one. Chapter note from Dr. Penrose's journal. The people are changing. Not into vampires. Not into anything we have words for. Some simply disappear. Others stand in place for hours, smiling. A constable bit his own wrist off and fed it to a crow. A boy drank the ink from the Bible and screamed in Hebrew. I saw a woman crying shadows instead of tears. I think, it's thinking through us. The fog is a thought. It wants shape. The fog reached Paris on the 6th day. Berlin on the 7th. By the 10th, cities were devouring themselves. The infected no longer acted as people. They didn't scream. They listened. And walked in spirals. And built things from bones. Altars. To him. To the one buried beneath the bloodline. To the mouth behind the mouth. In the deepest hours of night, in the ruins of Carfax Abbey, something began to stir. The stones shook. The soil bled. And from the place where Dracula had once risen, another figure began to take form. Not Dracula. Not Jonathan. Not Mina. But something new. A child, perhaps. Or a god. It breathed air, and the world grew colder. It blinked. And the sky bled light. There was no more dawn. Light had not disappeared, but changed. Twisted. It came in pulses, sickly red, like veins flashing under skin. The sky above London was not sky anymore. It pulsed like the inside of a lung, stretching and tightening with each unholy breath. At the center of the storm stood what was once Carfax Abbey. Now it was a ruin built anew, flesh-wrapped stone, a cathedral of bone and screaming iron. Where crosses once stood, there were jaws, frozen open in silent moans, cracked with candlelight that oozed wax made from human fat. It was here that the new Dracula had risen. But this was not the Count. This was not even a man. This was the concept of hunger. A creature shaped by centuries of myth, feeding off blood, belief, and betrayal. He wore no cloak. He had no fangs. His face was a mask of countless mouths, whispering languages not meant for air. They called him by no name. Only the mouth of God. Mina stood at his side. She no longer remembered love. No longer remembered pain. She was now a conduit, both womb and word for the entity that had devoured Jonathan, Van Helsing, and the last slivers of time. Her skin was cracked marble, etched with red veins that moved like ants under glass. Her voice, when it came, sounded like wind dragging nails across a chalkboard. You gave us shape, she whispered to the masses, standing in Trafalgar Square. You feared the dark, so we became it. You feared the grave, so we fed from it. You feared God, so now we wear his name. The crowd stood still. All of them smiling. Only one man still resisted. Dr. Charles Penrose. He had wrapped his skull in bandages soaked in garlic oil and holy water, murmured the Lord's Prayer backward, carved silver runes into his flesh, and swallowed nails to stop the voices from crawling up his throat. Still, he heard them. He stood atop the remains of Westminster Abbey, armed with the last relic of Van Helsing. A shattered blade, its silver burned black but still pulsing weakly. The mouth was not invincible. But it was awakening. Penrose knew what must be done. He did not expect to live. The new Dracula, the mouth, was feeding. Not from blood, but from meaning. Books turned to blank pages when he passed. Clocks unwound. Paintings lost color. Language itself broke down, signs read backward, names vanished from gravestones, and prayers turned to moans when spoken aloud. He walked slowly through the ruins of London, and the buildings leaned to hear him breathe. With each step, time buckled. With each whisper, a continent listened. Africa's deserts began to darken. Ice melted from the poles, releasing strange fossils, bones with too many joints and holes where eyes had never belonged. It was no longer just a horror. It was a reversal. Of man. Of God. Of reality. Penrose entered the cathedral. Immediately, his nose bled. The air hummed with language that predated atoms. The walls sweated blood. He stepped over offerings, babies with teeth, crows sewn to cats, a priest whose heart beat visibly in his hands. Mina stood before the altar. She looked at him. And smiled. You remember your name, she said. That's rare. I remember London, Penrose growled. Before you infected it. She laughed. It was always infected. We just cleared the rot to reveal the bone. He lifted the relic. Mina did not move. She bowed. Then offer it, she whispered, to him. The mouth descended from above. It didn't walk. It grew. A mass of limbs and symbols, cloaked in blood vapor and shaped like a man only because humans had imagined it so. It was older than stories. Older than death. Where its feet touched the ground, the stone turned to organs. Where it breathed, lungs bloomed from the walls. It bent low to Penrose. Thousands of mouths opened. Are you afraid? It asked in every voice Penrose had ever loved. No, Penrose whispered. Then drove the relic into his own chest. The scream that followed was not human. Not even sound. It was pure meaning. The relic, blood-soaked and shattered, ignited as it drank Penrose's soul. It became a beacon, a pulse of burning faith, and it burned memory into the cathedral, images of sunlight, prayers, the sound of laughter and bells. It was not enough to kill the mouth. But it hurt him. The mouth staggered backward. Its limbs fell into ash. Its mouth shrieked, stars above London flickering in agony. But Mina moved fast. She touched the relic and inverted it. The light cracked. The beam of holiness folded in on itself, became red, then black, then silence. Penrose's body rose. His face gone. Only a blank, glowing mask remained. And then. The mouth consumed him. Not by devouring him, but by making him a new page. A new prayer. A new servant. All across the world, the change began. Rain no longer fell. It whispered. It left marks on skin. The sea stopped moving. It became still, reflecting nothing. Children stopped being born. Instead, mothers gave birth to eggs. Some hatched. Some pulsed. The sun remained in the sky, but it was no longer light. It was an eye. And it never blinked. Mina stood at the altar, one hand on her stomach. Inside, something stirred. It would not be born. It would be released. A child not of blood, but of thought. A new God. A final God. One not written in books, but in whispers, in stains, in scars. She smiled, and all of London sighed with her. Somewhere in the remnants of Van Helsing's tomb, a mouse crawled through rubble. It stopped. Sniffed. And fell on its side. Dead. From above, a smile opened in the stone. The hunger was still growing. The mouth had only just begun.